Fishing in the Sun by Kernan. Chapter 14. Walking on Thin Ice. It has been my worst ingrained fear since we arrived in this land of snow and ice, and it has just happened. 3 of us are walking across the frozen lake side by side in the black darkness, the beams of our head torches dancing on the smooth crust in front of us. I am in the middle. Pasi, our driver and host, is on my right. Jan, the fishing guide, is on my left. I have only known these guys a matter of hours, but already we're chatting and laughing away like old buddies, the way fishing folk often do. I think this happens because anglers are united by a passion that gives us immediate common ground and countless stories to swap. Anyway, the atmosphere is so convivial that you can almost, but not quite, forget how damn cold it is. Then instantly, and without any warning, Jan disappears. That primeval dread I'd been battling, of the ice cracking and swallowing a person, has come true. Instinctively, I reach for, but no, let's leave it there for now. This, in writer's world, is what we call a cliffhanger, the setting up of a tense moment in the narrative that teases the reader and leaves them wanting more. But hey, you already know this isn't the most serious fishing book you've ever read in your life, so surely he's not really going to die. Or does he? Talking of impending death, I must admit to harbouring a few suspicions when my family unveiled a surprise present for a special birthday. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least half expecting some kind of fishing trip as a birthday gift for my family. So there I was then, trying to second guess them. I'm thinking Florida Keys for the bonefish, maybe the Caribbean for tarpon, Africa for any number of exotic species. What I'd never considered was opening the card with a big 6-0 in the front to find a homemade voucher with a still in the cover from Grumpy Old Men, the original movie with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, not the Telly Winchfest, and an invite to a week's ice fishing in Finland. Come on, you can't blame me for momentarily wondering if there was an ulterior motive. Bear in mind, this was just a couple of years after only the skill of heart surgeons had kept me in the land of the living. What better way to finish off someone with a dodgy, patched up ticker than dispatching them on a fishing trip to a sub-zero wasteland? Once I'd convinced myself they weren't trying to get rid of me, the excitement set in, and it turned into one of the great adventures of my life. Mind you, there were a couple of humps to go over before I could properly appreciate my birthday present. Not least my missus setting our stopover hotel in Manchester on fire, trying to get the shoddy toaster to work at breakfast. Our epic journey of, quite literally, planes, trains and automobiles was almost at an end before the next big scare. We'd been picked up by the aforementioned Pasi at the railway station of the town of Mikkeli after a 2.5-hour train journey from Helsinki. Now he was driving us deep into Finland's lakeland. It was close to midnight, and having been travelling since early morning, we wanted nothing more than to get to our destination, collapse, and start afresh next day. I had just about resigned myself to the sensation of being driven along snow-packed roads at high speed when our 4x4 suddenly careered off the road and down a tree-covered verge. Convinced Pasi had skidded off the highway, a jolt of panic shot through me, and I instinctively reached out for my wife and prepared to lose our faces in airbags. But next thing I knew, we were back on the road and heading for the middle of a lake. By road, I mean ice road. There are some things in life you think you'll never get used to, and for me, being driven across a frozen expanse of water is one of them. Not even the cars and trucks and snowplows routinely charging up and down the ice roads made me feel any better about the idea. But this is the winter wonderland of Finland, and the rules you've lived by all your days don't apply here, so you have no choice but to learn to roll with it. It makes perfect sense, of course. When the lakes are frozen for nearly half the year, why drive all the way around them when you can save time and fuel by cutting straight across? Just don't expect me to get used to it. Our base was a cosy wooden cabin on the edge of Lake Sukkio, as warm and comfy as it was well equipped, though with temperatures averaging 16 below zero, we never worked up the courage to try out the sauna. It is in the heart of the Finnish lakeland, a vast wilderness dotted with thousands of bodies of water enclosed in dense pine forests, all frozen for 5 months at a time. It takes a bit of adapting to, the notion that everywhere you look is covered in snow and that it's here to stay. There is a stillness and peaceful beauty to it all, as shades of silver and grey sparkle in the air and shimmer through the trees. At those times when the weak sun was hidden, it felt like living in a black and white photo. But enough of the picture postcard stuff. I was here to fish, and once wrapped in multiple layers of thermals and boots that came with a claim that they were Arctic proof, I soon found myself screwing up my eyes, trying to spot a tiny red flag in a blizzard. The whipped up snow was stinging my cheeks, but I shrugged it off, because I had a bite, and as all anglers will testify, there is nothing that helps you forget adverse conditions like knowing there's a fish on. Carefully, I lifted the polystyrene board covering the hole in the ice and tried feeling with my semi-numb fingers for the pike throbbing on the line. Flag? Polystyrene board? Yes, this is fishing, but not as we know it. This is going back to primary 1. Strike that. It's more like nursery school, because any angling knowledge and skill that I'd managed to pick up over the years counted for nothing. And for starters, I mostly fish for a week without touching a rod, unless you count a contraption shaped like a drumstick with a reel attached. It was an extraordinary insight into an approach to our sport that is a world away from what we do. In the first 24 hours alone, I was shown half a dozen fishing techniques, all born out of a climate that sees the country snowbound and the lakes frozen from November to April. There is no one better to introduce you to Finland's fishing dark arts than expert guide Jan Parviainen. Having fished since he was in nappies, he packed in an engineering job to make a career out of his real love. Watching and listening to him in action, you quickly figure out he's earning a living from what he would be doing anyway. First up was catching baitfish 100 metres out from our lakeside cabin. This turned out to be the closest to any methods I was familiar with. After drilling a hole in the 60 centimetre ice, 2 feet in old money, we used a flimsy plastic line holder to pull up little perch and roach on dyed pink maggot, or flyworm as Jan called it. The Finns don't share our sensitivities or squeamishness about live bait, so these fish go straight back under the ice as helpless prey for bigger perch, zander and pike. For the bigger fish, Jan first demonstrated the centuries-old traditional setup, line suspended from a thick branch laid across a hole with another fork stick holding it in place. You can't help but falling in love with the technique for its sheer simplicity. The modern equivalent, that polystyrene board with a spool of line and a handle attached to the underside, got me my first pike of a trip, a jack of a couple of pounds. Don't forget, you're doing all of this at temperatures most of us will never have encountered. Sensibly, you have plenty of hot drink breaks between shortish bursts of fishing. I've got to admit, there is something very civilised about eating sizzling, spicy local sausages off an indoor barbecue, washed down with industrial strength coffee, then go back out to find a biting fish has triggered my red indicator flag. That I could definitely get used to. After that, we were off to check the ice nets, and it's hard enough just getting your head round how this system of ropes and pulleys works under a solid frozen surface. That produced the biggest fish of our stay, a pike so bright and glistening it looked like it was made from shiny plastic. There were numerous jacks and zander, plus a few bream, which were scathingly tossed into a pile to be mashed up for dog food. I spent almost all of the daylight hours on the frozen lake. When I wasn't fishing, I was either being towed across the expanse with my wife on a husky safari, whizzing around on, and frequently falling off, a fat tired bike. If you think it sounds like child's play, you'd be right, and I make no apologies. 60 going on 6, that'll do for me. Mind you, it's chilly child's play, though saying yet again that it's cold is a bit like admitting Scotland gets a little rain. Yes, all great fun on the lake, but none of that had quite sealed my trust in the ice by the time I went out night fishing with Jan and Pasi. We drove several miles across another water, Lake Kivesi, in search of what was a new species for me, the burbot. It's a sort of freshwater ling, now extinct in the UK, but so numerous in the Middle Ages that they were used as pig's wool. A shy creature which emerges under cover of darkness, it is sought after and considered a delicacy in Finland. Without the watery sun to offer even the illusion of a tiny bit of warmth, the conditions that night were far and away the coldest I have ever fished in. The temperature was touching 20 below, and I swear I could feel the strengthening wind drive holes into my brain like tent pegs. The guys, turning serious for a moment, explained to me that the prospect of hypothermia was very real, so the strict rule was 20 to 25 minutes fishing at a time max, with breaks back in the 4x4 to thaw out. Otherwise, Jan warned in his scarily matter-of-fact tone, there was a fair chance we would die. It took less than 5 minutes to realise he had not been exaggerating. I could not stop the violent shivering in every part of my body. And I actually felt numb inside my skull by the time Passy signalled we should make our first trek back to the wagon, about 100 yards away. So, there I was, in the middle of our freezing but merry band, as we followed the circles of light from our headlamps. I was nodding at one of Jan's stories, when suddenly there was silence, and he was no longer walking beside me. He had disappeared. Horror-struck, my breath caught in my throat as he plunged downwards through the cracked crust. Through nothing more than reflex, I reached out and made a grab for his arm, determined to cling on and stop him being trapped in a tomb of ice. But the momentum of his weight and the speed of his descent was too much, and he slipped from my grasp. Then, just as suddenly, Jan was looking up at us with a grin and a thumbs up. I realised he wasn't sinking, but standing up to his thighs in numbing water. He had crashed not through the ice, but a long, snow-covered polystyrene board which had been placed over a fish trap. These traps, baited cages in, ironically, coffin-shaped trenches dug out of the ice, are perfectly legal, but they're supposed to be marked with poles or flags, and this one wasn't. Remarkably, Jan recognised the handiwork and immediately started punching numbers on his mobile. It was one of those surreal, pinch yourself, is this really happening moments. There I was, way out of my comfort zone, night blind on solid water not far from the Russian border, listening to a guy almost waist deep in a giant slush puppy, berating someone with the words I didn't understand, but with an anger in his voice I certainly did. His tone shifted from rant to reasonable, and finally, again amazingly, to friendly. The culprit was, ironically, the local fishing bailiff. He had come clean and apologised straight away, before promising to come out with warning flags at first light. Yes, stable doors and horses. Then came a glimpse of Finnish humour. After Passy and I had hauled Jan out of the pit, he looked at each of us in turn, with his face an expressionless mask. "Okay, gentlemen," he said in his perfect but accented English, like he was in a Bond movie. "I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that we can take any fish we want out of the trap for dinner. The bad news is," and here he paused for effect in the freezing darkness, "there are 2 more of these traps between here and the car." You'll find more entertaining, amusing and thought-provoking stories in Fishing in the Sun, available from Amazon in paperback and on Kindle.